I don't want to suffer. However, I do see its value. I do see its merit. I do see its reason. And so we unfortunately live in a world where there is a lot of suffering. However, I don't think that the solution is a world with zero suffering. I think that there's always, it's what is suffering is relative. A person that has tons of wealth still suffers in their own way, right? I know that my conditions are not as bad as they could be, but that doesn't mean that I think my life is perfect. I still suffer in certain ways that a person with, less would look at me and say, "How could you be so upset about such a, like I believe the term is like first world problems or suffering from success, things along these lines, right? Like it's such a minuscule issue, and yet it still causes suffering in a sense. Not at the same physical scale, right? Someone that is starving is definitely physically suffering a whole lot more than a person that, just can't find the right pair of shoes to wear tomorrow. It seems like how could you even compare those things? But the reality is that what is suffering in your life is relative to the conditions of your life, which means that there's really no way to remove suffering from the world, but the reason why suffering exists is to help us improve and to teach us lessons that we would not want to listen to or learn otherwise. And so there is a level of necessity in suffering. And so while I'm not saying that I enjoy suffering and I want to suffer, I also don't think that a lack of suffering is ideal either. Because in a sense, you will suffer from the lack of suffering. And that seems absurd when you have suffering in your life. But if you were to remove all suffering, I think that is going to result in similar circumstances. You can, like, this is a very commonly mentioned thing, but there's the whole, like, rat utopia experiment thing where they were basically removed suffering, and yet the civilization of rats still failed because even when you remove all suffering, there's still some kind of suffering to be had. And so it seems absurd, but when it happens, you know, it happens. And so, um, oh my goodness, that is the tiniest little baby deer. Sorry, got distracted. Um, anyway, um, it is. It's an interesting balance, but I think at the end of the day, if you are telling yourself you have removed suffering from your life, you are lying to yourself because you cannot remove suffering from your life because there is always something else to suffer. And I would consider myself at peace, but at the same time, I am not constantly zen and peaceful, right? I've accepted that I will die, and I do not care, right? I've accepted that. I understand that at one point I will die, and I'm not afraid of dying, but I'm also not afraid to live. And so I think it's this balance where you understand that, you know, what is what is. However, at the same time, you're not going through all of this effort to try and be this super calm, not bothered by anything person because that's not what you're here to do either, right? You're not here to just be a spectator, right? You're here to take part, and so you can't effectively take action without having an opinion, without having a reaction, right? You can't react to an action if you're not affected by it, right? And so I don't think it's proper to avoid reaction. It is better to react to an extent, right? You don't want to overreact. You don't want to um, have this kind of complete 180 flip, but some kind of response is necessary, and some kind of um, impact on yourself is necessary for you to improve and for conditions to improve. Because if you decide, everyone's starving, but it's fine, like everyone just dies, right? And that's not, you could argue, oh, well, it doesn't matter. Yeah, but like if it doesn't matter, then why not do something, right? If it doesn't matter, then why not try, right? Because the two options are completely die out or let other people play the game, right? What do you think, you know, is better, right? The game stops or the game continues, right? If you enjoy the game, let other people enjoy the game too. And, if you're not enjoying the game, you know, that doesn't mean not everyone else is enjoying the game. Like other people enjoy the game even if you're not. So keep it going for them, right? I don't know. So that's just how I feel, right? I am at peace, but I am not peaceful to an extent, right? Like I'm not saying like I'm throwing fists. um, but I will not stand idly by and watch everyone, destroy themselves. I'm going to at least put in some effort to make a difference, to change things. And maybe it's all for naught, but I could have done nothing and it would have been all for naught too. So I'd at least like to make an attempt. Anyway, peace out.
So basically, everything is relative. So, so it does not, like, just as I have said, you cannot reach perfection, right? You cannot remove suffering because there is always something else. There is always more. There is always, another level. And so trying to escape is, misguided. There is no escape. There's nowhere you can go to avoid it because it's everywhere. Because that's what life is, right? And so if a problem is, if you've got a problem and you don't want to deal with it, that's fine. But wherever you go to get away from that problem, you will find another problem that you'll not want to deal with. And then if you don't deal with that problem, then you go somewhere else. You're going to run into another problem that you don't want to deal with, right? It does not matter where you go. You will always have a problem arise that is difficult, that is uncomfortable, that is painful. You don't want to do it. You don't want to deal with it. You don't want to address it. But sometimes that is the only option because there will always be problems, right? And the only way to get rid of problems is to solve them. And the solution is not always run away, right? In some cases, it may be best to just leave, right? To just move on. But there are certain things where doing that is only prolonging the problem or is only setting you up for another issue, right? And so I think it's important to realize this and important to come to kind of some sort of acceptance that my life is not perfect, but it never will be. And so I'm going to have to fight for what I want it to be, right? If I want it to be better, that's on me to make a reality, right? No one's going to solve all my problems for me. It just will never happen. Because what are all of your problems? Do you even know? You couldn't list them if you tried. I guarantee it. Right? You can list a lot of problems. I'm sure everyone's got tons of problems they could list, but you don't know all the problems that befall you until they become relevant, right? And so a lot of people aren't even aware of all the problems that they have, right? And so to assume you could get rid of things you're not even aware of, to assume that you could resolve issues that you haven't gotten any information about yet, it's misguided, right? That's not how you do it. That's not how you go through life. And so I don't think the removal of suffering should be the goal of your life. And I don't think that if you do make it your goal, I don't think you can ever achieve it. Because as I said, there is always suffering. Is the suffering of, as I said, as my example, someone starving compared to someone not knowing what to wear, really, can you really say that those are the same? I don't know, right? Because everyone's experience is subjective. Someone that is starving may be used to being hungry, and so it does not bother them as much, right? Whereas this person doesn't know what to wear, and it could be an existential crisis because, you know, they need to make a really good first impression, right? And they have all these things like this is their future they're worried about, right? So there is a lot of suffering with seemingly a trivial and like a simple task. You know, it's trivial, doesn't seem like it has any effect. How could you possibly suffer from something like that? And you would laugh it off and be like, you're absurd for suffering that. But at the same time, it could be a very real and logical reason to be suffering from it, right? To be stressed out about that, to be concerned, right? And indecisive. And in the same extent, you know, someone that's been hungry, right, that hasn't had a lot of food to eat for most of their life, it doesn't make a lot of sense to constantly complain about how hungry they are because that's just how life is for them, right? And so suffering is subjective, and the extreme of what it is subjective, right? And so if it's different for every person, if it's different for like different things, like certain people, you know, they love their job, right? Other people hate it, right? And so when there's that kind of, you know, relative perspective, how could you possibly remove it, right? Because what does it even really mean to suffer, right? What does it even really mean to, you know, have problems, right? Is anything really a problem without your mind, right? Without you thinking it's a problem, without you thinking about why it's a problem, what the problems are, what it causes, you know, what the effects will be, without you thinking about the future, right? Without you thinking about all these things, what even is suffering? What is problems, right? If there is no, if it will not have any effect on you, right? Because you've removed all potential for an effect, then there's no suffering, right? Because what even is suffering? But if you do that, you also remove your ability to do anything. Because in order to remove that, you are giving up what makes you human. You're giving up everything about you that makes you human in order to remove suffering from your life. And I feel like, while enlightenment sends you down that path, I do not think it's very enlightened to do that. If you were supposed to be enlightened, you would have been born that way, is my opinion, right? There's a certain, like, the end game of enlightenment, I guess, is what I mean, right? If you needed to be truly awake, right, it would happen and it will happen, right? So if you, you know, when you're here, right, when you're in this life, when you're experiencing the world, and, you know, all you're focused on is escaping it, you're putting yourself in a position of suffering for no reason, right? Who told you needed to escape, right? Who told you that this was a prison, right? If this world sucks, fix it. If this world is suffering, change it, right? I feel like for the longest time, it's just been the world is suffering. There's no way to fix it. There's no way to solve it. And while suffering cannot be removed, it is not something to fear. It is not something to reject. It is not something to be disgusted by and avoid. This is a part of the world for a reason. And I don't think this world is as bad as you think it is, right? On one hand, the world right now sucks. I agree. But that doesn't mean it always has to be this way. This is not how things have to be. This is how things are because we allow them to be this way, because everyone just tries to escape rather than solving the problem. But there's nowhere to go. And you will never be able to avoid these problems. They will chase you. And so if you think this world is suffering and you think this world is not salvageable, it's not worth saving, and you're just going to focus on saving yourself, then you're setting yourself up for yourself and the world and everyone that lives here and everyone that comes after you up for failure, right? Like, if something is a problem for you, it's probably also a problem for someone else. So, I think it's a good idea for us to work together to try and remove those issues, right? And a thought that I had as I'm saying this is that this can be sent in many directions, right? And let's try and make it good actions, right? Like let's make sure that these problems are not, because problems are subjective. Let's make sure that we're not using this out of context, right? Let's make sure that we're not going to go attack people because they're a problem for us, right? That's not what I mean. I don't mean use violence to solve your problems, because that's just going to create more problems. So you'll solve one problem and make 5 more. That's not very efficient. It's dumb. Don't do that, right? If you think violence and conflict resolves your problems, you're a fool, because it doesn't, and it never will, right? It may solve a problem, but it will not solve your problems, right? Because, as I said, solve one problem, make 5 more. That's an extremely inefficient system, right? You're a net negative of 4. 4 times the loss, right? That's awful. That's awful. Like, who would take that deal? You give me $5, I'll give you 1, right? Like, who would take that deal? Why would you take that deal, right? Let's stop. Let's, instead of, a bad trade-off, let's just come to agreements, right? Let's work together rather than, pitting everyone against each other. It's not very efficient. Right? If you think about how many resources are dedicated to just warfare, it's actually so embarrassing. As a human race, as the human race, as a part of the human race, I am embarrassed on behalf of the human race to look at that number, to look at that figure, and say, we are intelligent. Because it's just so laughably stupid. And, people will disagree. But to think you're intelligent and use your resources so idiotically is idiotic. right? The amount of problems America could have solved for itself if it focused on its people rather than its enemies, right? Would have been great. And it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be like this. And, you may say, oh, you're just, this idealist, you want to just sing Kumbaya or whatever, and everyone, just holds hands and sings together. And yes. And I don't think it's impossible. I think that you're just being dumb. And, will it happen now? Will it happen in my lifetime? Probably not. But I think it's worth starting. And it's just a change in mindset. The only thing that prevents us from being able to do this is humans and the human mindset. The human mindset has been wired for conflict. We don't need it. It's not required. We have technology now. Technology solves the issue of scarcity. Technology solves the issue of inequality. We do not need to be fighting. We don't. We don't. But we can't come to an agreement because we're all so stubborn and we're all so sure of ourselves. We're all so certain that we know what's best, that we know how things should be. And I guarantee you, you don't, right? And so, let's fix this, right? Let's change. Because the only future that lies ahead if we don't is desolation. There is no other alternative. If we do not change our ways, there will be no more humanity. We will kill ourselves. And I don't understand why we don't see that. The future needs to be considered. The future matters. And we cannot pretend like only the present exists. Because realistically, what even is the present? This is going to be a side tangent, but what even is the present? Because anytime you try to tell me what it is, you've already missed it. Right? You can't tell me when the present is because you can say, oh, it's right now. But as soon as you said that, it's already past. And it wasn't true. By the time I heard what you said, it was wrong. Right? The present isn't even really a thing. Right? Everyone says, oh, live in the present. You can't live in the present. It's constantly moving. It's constantly changing. You can't reach the present because as soon as you're there, you're already, it's already moved on, right? So we're perpetually living in the past, actually. And so the future is all that there is. And I think it's unjust to pretend like the future only affects you and your life. Because it doesn't. And, yeah. I don't know. Kind of went all over the place. Peace out.